Calling all educators, students, and space enthusiasts. The 2025 Small Sat Education Conference is where the future of space begins. Join us at the Kennedy Space Center for hands-on workshops, expert speakers, and industry networking, all focused on bringing small sat innovation into the classroom. Explore CubeSats, high-altitude balloon missions, and hands-on STEM workshops designed to launch the next generation of space explorers. Don't miss this chance to connect, learn, and innovate. Visit smallsateducation.org to register today. You can find a link in the show notes. Let's go to Space Blue Sky Learning, episode 150, on learning a trade. Today, Kevin and I meet with Jo Mackiewicz. She spent 20 plus years researching how communication facilitates and impedes learning while teaching at universities such as Auburn and Iowa State. She's studied via corpus and discourse analysis, writing-centered talk, technical editing, and more recently, communication between welding instructors and students in the book Welding Technical Communication. In 2022, Jo finished her diploma in welding and started working at Howe's Welding and Metal Fabrication, a small repair and fab shop in Ames, Iowa. Her latest book, Learning Skilled Trades in the Workplace, describes and analyzes her experiences learning welding and fabrication on the job and is available to download or read online for free. Oh, and did I mention she's my bestie since high school? You will be inspired by this amazing woman in STEM and see that pursuing one's passion can come at any point in your career. Stay tuned. Welcome, Jo Mackiewicz. Thanks so much for spending some time with us today.
My
we are
pleasure.
excited because your story is a little different from some of our guests. So tell our audience a little bit about how you kind of came into STEM a little later in your career.
Okay. Well, yeah, I've been a university professor for over 20 years. I've always been in English departments. I do technical communication. So that was a lot of my history until about 2018 when I started taking welding courses and decided to get my welding diploma, which took me 3 years. And so I graduated in 2022 and after a year off for the pandemic also. And I started working at a small repair and fab shop. So what I found was that my background in technical communication jived really well with what I was learning in the shop. And also I started thinking about the ways that communication takes place in fabrication sites, but just more broadly in skilled trades. So what I see as my work now is sort of connecting communication and skilled trades.
Are skilled trades and welding being a very prominent,
prototypical one?
yeah, very archetypal,
Yeah.
would you say that the skilled trades, in the effort in our society today to say we need more welders, right? Is there a disconnect between how you train a welder and the ability to scale up and train adequate numbers? If we need a large number of welders, do we have the processes in place that can properly train them based on your experience?
Well, I love that question, and it's super huge. Like I could talk a long time about this, but the answer is sort of yes and no. And it also depends on where you're looking. So in other countries. So if we're thinking more broadly, like in Germany or Australia, there are other forms of apprentices for young people in their education. So there's advantages and disadvantages to that. I've just, the advantages are, yeah, you get more practice, more depth of practice early on, but maybe you're also, to use a kind of negative word, siloed earlier on into that, maybe before you really could make up your mind about what you would like to do. So there's costs and benefits to each sort of approach. And then the United States, yeah, we've got a lot of ways to sort of develop skilled trade workforces. But even that's complicated. Like what sort of apprenticeships do we have early on for people? What sort of apprenticeships and what are they learning in workplaces, workplace training programs? And then also just how does workplace learning happen naturally on the job, even if there's no formal apprenticeship or training program? So like how you can study workforce development and skilled trades learning, there's just a broad swath of how that can happen. The last book that I wrote focused on just sort of informal learning in a skilled trade setting. So just what happens day to day, not in a particular training program. But as part of my research, I also looked at some training programs at big fabrication sites, the ones that can actually fund them because, small places generally can't. So places like Vermeer, John Deere, they have targeted formal training programs. But even then, there's questions about what do we want to produce at the end of these? And so, for example, I think in some of these formal training programs, you're training people for real particular tasks and maybe not producing um, more generalized expertise in a trade. So people learn single production tasks, for example, one type of MIG welding, and they do that. You train in it because that's what you're going to be doing on the job a lot. But perhaps we might think about other kinds of apprenticeships that teach broader knowledge. Like, for example, different kinds of welding, different processes, doing repair, not just production, something like that.
Right.
I hope that answers your question, but
It's great.
it's a lot.
You actually queued up the next one. You mentioned informal learning, say with companies, but we've done business and worked with our local community college. And
Mhm.
community colleges, they really exist to try to get folks, even some young adults into the workforce.
Yeah.
And I was
Mhm.
told by them when they want to create a new program, they need a company, right, to come and say, this is the skill set we need. So my question
Mhm.
to you is, you mentioned apprenticeships with informal learning. How
Mhm.
do you see the community colleges and
Yeah.
their role in that? And then secondly,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you more about Germany and their apprenticeships. But let's go with the
Okay, well,
community
I don't
college
pretend to
question
be an
first.
expert on Germany, but yeah. So I can speak to community colleges, particularly here in the U.S. And I mean, I'm a graduate of one. Um, so I think there's always this sort of tension between funding for programs, which often like additional funds can come from companies who want people particularly trained for the jobs that they have. But then there's this tension of what else should people know? Are we kind of pushing some knowledges aside in order to target them toward a particular company and what they want? So yeah, community colleges are often posed with that question. But I don't think it's like 100% across the board that that happens, but definitely community colleges in the US at least, yeah, tend to work with big fabrication companies to like implement programs to make sure that their
Right.
graduates are like job ready. Of
Right.
course, like for me as an educator, that raises the question, like, okay, are we getting like breadth of knowledge in these programs?
So
So again, always
the
attention.
note I just wrote is the goal of education to make cogs in a machine, like
Mm,
workforce, or is it to make good citizens? And I think the dynamic tension there is,
yeah.
no one should ever go to school and only be, in this tiny widget and not get the
Mhm.
advantage of
Yeah.
a better worldview, maybe.
Yeah, and I think it's super complex. Like because even if we're training people for a particular task in production, and I'm simplifying it by saying like a particular task. I mean, nobody's doing like the same task all the time. So on one hand, I think like production itself is complicated. And people who are doing work that perhaps some people think of as like repetitive or rote, even that has great complexity in fabrication sites. So I don't want to be dismissive of that sort of knowledge. But it's true also that if we say we want highly skilled people, then they need not just depth in like one subject matter, they need greater breadth. So that is in tension with producing people who are looking for or who are targeting a specific job. Another complication is that it is difficult to get highly skilled people or to develop that kind of breadth and depth of expertise in a diploma program. Because, really what these sorts of programs are aiming at, I'll use welding as an example because it's the one I know best, but you're trying to introduce people to what the trade is. So to even think that, oh, we're going to be producing like experts out of a 1-year program, I think that's impossible. I think really what people are trying to do is just learn the basics. Like, how do you run a decent bead on like steel coupons, right?
Right.
Like
Physical
the
skills
yeah,
as
to
opposed to the
introduce them
soft skills.
to the different processes, to introduce them to different positions in welding, to teach them how to set up a machine themselves so that they could approach a new welding machine, not just the one they
Right.
learned on in their booth, and be able to work. So these are the basics. There's a question too of like, what are we asking of these, technical career and technical programs?
Well, and
Yeah.
that leads to my question is, as I'm thinking about, because I've obviously talked with you a little bit about this before, and I know that you're working for like a small kind of, one guy shop, which seems to be of the past, right? We've moved to these, and you were just mentioning that the colleges or whatever are training with these larger companies, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what from your perspective of what you've been watching, you're learning on the job from this one person. That's that mentorship that you have talked
Mm-hmm.
about. That's the part that's lacking, right? So when we think about this, if we're moving towards that bigger picture of these companies, what
Mm-hmm.
is going to be missing that you've experienced by having the one guy kind of teach you his trade as he's going along? What is missing from
Well,
those programs like that?
I mean, it's a difficult problem because like if you're in a one-person shop like I am, or a few person
Right,
shop
right.
to be honest, yeah, but I'm learning from my boss Jim Howe, who's got 50 plus years of expertise, and to learn all these different knowledge domains, all this different conceptual and procedural knowledge, it's the process of years of getting repetitions even on one machine that might happen like every few months. So you have to stay in a certain place and train with one person for a long time in order to develop competence in a broad way. So how do places like, production facilities like John Deere or Vermeer or all those big companies, how do they do that on site? And I think you're hitting the nail on the head. You have to have some sort of apprenticeship and mentorship program. And
That's
people,
long term. It has
Right.
that's
to be
long
long
term.
term.
So,
That's a
Yeah.
problem in like almost every industry,
right.
even with teachers, right? Like back when
Hmm.
I was first becoming one, it was clear that there weren't enough mentors. You could do an internship. We did
Yeah.
those, but it
Yeah.
wasn't enough to really give you all of that background knowledge
Yeah.
that you get from the professionals.
Exactly. It's about like building a relationship. And I mean, it could happen with different people, but it wouldn't take companies investing in employees' knowledge, not just for the particular tasks that they have to do for their job, but investing in them as tradespeople, as individuals to try to grow their knowledge. And maybe I'm a little naive or Pollyannish in thinking that that's a possibility, but I hope that it is because you can see, like I just saw on LinkedIn the other day, some representative from Ford talking about the need for highly skilled tradespeople. Well, if that's what you want, then you can't just target training towards particular tasks. You really have to invest in people and you have to create skilled expert tradespeople because it used to happen in a sort of artisanal system where people learned from people for a long time and studied with them and developed that way, developed their craft. But we don't have that same sort, like you were saying, Shauna, we don't have enough of those settings anymore.
Right.
So other companies, if that's what they truly want, if they actually want to walk the walk of creating skilled expertise, then they have to invest on it.
Right. It sounds like the diploma that you mentioned, your welding diploma, it sounds like a teaching certificate or a pilot's license, right? That only means you've met the minimum
Oh
requirements,
yeah.
right? No one lets a rookie pilot fly a commercial airliner, right?
No.
I
No.
took some kids to Aerojet Rocketdyne, where they literally manufacture rocket engines here locally last month. And we met three kinds of folks on the floor: engineers,
Hmm.
technologists, and technicians. And what's really interesting is the 4 year degree kids or the 4 year engineers, they're not allowed to touch the
Yeah.
equipment.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is the technicians, which are like a union trade, right? They are
Hmm.
the hands on builders. And then the
Hmm.
technologists were somewhere in between. My
Mm,
question to
okay.
you, and this sort of falls back into the Germany question,
Yeah.
do you see in Europe or anywhere else, is there a, does getting the skills trade have to be parallel to, or could it be serial to a university type education where you mentioned a more broad thing? Is there any place in your experience that you've seen
Mm.
where there's this blending of a sort of a classic university education with some serious hands-on skills, maybe sort of like the computer science
Interesting.
folks do? I wondered if
I
you.
love that. I love that thought. I don't know of it, but just because I don't know of it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Like I don't pretend to like have my, ear to the ground on programs in Germany. I think that's a beautiful idea. I think that like there's some way that engineering programs sort of nod at this, like with a class in welding, where
Mhm. Or
it's like a
co-ops. What about co-op
semester.
experiences, right? What about
Yeah,
co-op
yeah.
experiences?
Yeah, but I think the bigger issue is that we just want to move people through quickly and people want to move through quickly. So the idea when we talk that this is a long time process, it's almost like back when a parent has a business and they train their kids in it and it like
Hmm.
stays in the business because that knowledge becomes kind of like their property. They transfer it
Right.
down. But nowadays, it's how fast can I get out of school? How quickly can I get this degree? How can I get a
Right.
worker on into my job to fulfill this particular point? We've
Yeah.
lost, I think, the idea of value of the value of these trades
Hmm.
as because we've moved so much to like getting a degree, and maybe we're shifting back now to the idea of on the job learning, but
Hmm.
it's just it seems to me like we focus more on how quickly can we get the job done.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I can speak from my own, I have some experience with engineering programs, like just running like a communication class that's in there. I know that their degrees are really jam-packed with courses and they don't have a lot of electives. I know that like not all of them have to take some hands-on course in welding or something else. I think they try to implement application now. It might not be like welding something, but and of course it's going to be degree dependent. Um, but yeah, I think it's really difficult for engineers, like mechanical engineers, to understand the perspectives of people who are constructing these items that they design. And there's a lot of talk. I mean, you can see it in LinkedIn and other places about like, every engineer should have to go work on the shop floor for, a few months to really understand. And I understand why people say that because I think it is really important to see like when somebody's reading your specs or your technical drawing, like this isn't possible. Like what you've written here isn't possible. So I really like the idea of something that gives of a curriculum that gives more hands-on. But like Shauna said, students also just want to be done.
Well, when
And
you're
maybe they're not going to be on the shop floor when, chances are they're not.
right,
So maybe they don't see a ton of value in that. The way I've seen it most often, not that I have a big sample size or anything, but like the people I've talked to, I think it's more common for people who work in production or on the shop floor to then like go on and get their bachelor's degree and then act as that sort of liaison, maybe being like a
management,
lead
like
welder or
supervisors.
something like that.
Mm.
Yeah, who's better able to act as a sort of conduit between the two.
Well, now I'm thinking though, and I was gonna I'm going to take this back to now about some of the challenges that you've had, like kind of coming into this, what you've learned from it, and also being a female in this kind of realm in a second. So be thinking there. But immediately, I'm thinking to myself, all right, well, how much of this on the floor building or manufacturing is going to go the way of computers, AI in the future?
Yeah.
Or is there robotics? Yeah. So is there a
Yeah.
concern for that? And then I'll take it to
Oh,
the.
oh yeah, there's big concern for that for sure. I mean, and it's already happened. I've gone as part of my research for this last book. I went to 10 like fabrication sites in Iowa, and yeah, you can see welders working with robots. A lot of times doing the parts or the spaces that can't be reached by robotic arms, working with robots to do like whole chassis or things like that. So yeah, already I think there's a concern that if as technology advances, people in fabrication might lose some jobs. But this is not new, right? I mean, technology is constantly changing people's jobs, people's careers. I mean, we see it with writers now concerned with like, what does AI mean for my job, right? Um, I think that that just gets us back to the real need for greater expertise, to really invest in people who understand how machines work, how to repair them. Because even if we build all this technology, who's going to take care of it,
Right.
right? So
Right.
Yeah.
there's always people that have to be able to run it, to collaborate. So I see real value in investing in people to give them not just like this focalized, not I don't want to minimize it by saying just, but it's just part of the English language, but to give them depth of knowledge, but to also invest in breadth of knowledge.
I think the welder of the future would have in the toolkit some kind of robotically assisted welding, like that kit, the robotic assisted welding, that would just be part of the welder's toolkit, right? That
Mhm.
the welder should have the knowledge of operating and maintaining whatever robotics are involved with actually welding. See, that I think the
Yeah.
welder could own that, and that would just be part of their education is to not only do it by hand, but have the tool to do it. And if they did it by hand, they would have such a great understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, I'm not like I'm not a huge expert in like robotic welding, but from what I know, and I've looked at like a lot of different programs, community college programs, and their curricula, um, and you can see that's becoming more and more common for like robotic welding courses. So of course, it just depends on the resources of the program and what they can implement. But yeah, I think that's becoming more and more the case, particularly because if you're going to be graduating people who are going into entry level welding jobs, then they are probably going to be interacting with robotics, you know? So it's, I think that's becoming seen as more and more common and more important.
So let me kind of now focus back on you a little bit. And, as I was kind of saying, you mentioned you were a professor, you're dealing with communications and so forth. And then all of a sudden you decided later in life that it's a pretty big jump and
Yeah.
you're a girl. So
Yeah.
this is important, right? When we talk about in aerospace, we've often
Yeah.
seen that this is a male dominated field. It's getting better, but I bet you don't see many people like yourself there. So from your perspective, what is it about welding that you love? And
Uh-huh.
and what are your experiences as being probably one of the only females in the industry that you've come across so far?
Okay, yeah. So what I love it because it's so immediate. I love just the aesthetic of it, the beauty of it. I'm a particular sucker for aluminum TIG welding, so that's sort of my favorite thing to do. Aluminum acts very differently than steel does. It's sort of strange. So I didn't know I was going to love it as much as I did when I took that class in 2018 and just kind of took my first step into it, taking a night class. I didn't realize that I was going to like keep doing that until I got my diploma, but I really did just fall in love with it. Along the way, like my first semester, I was the first woman in the class. I was also the oldest person in the class. But along the way, I met other women, young women, um, who were going into welding. And I think that's becoming more and more common when I look at websites for different like apprenticeship programs or internships. I see a lot of young women who are trying this on, not just welding, but other trades as well. And I think that's because there's been some effort to recruit young women in general, into the field. There's, scholarships for them. There's mentorship programs for them now. I mean, the question is are we doing enough? And once we recruit women, are we retaining them? So this is actually a question I'm just looking into now as I'm writing an article for The Conversation, which is a site online. I wrote an article for them back in November. I'm writing one now on, it's about what's happened in the 40 years since the book, Jean Reith Schrodel's book, Alone in a Crowd, was published in 1985. And she is just like, she's like a guru to me, and I've never met her, but she did this really amazing study, these 25 interviews with women who back in 1985 were working as truck drivers, pipe fitters, welders, carpenters, plumbers, all the kinds of trades. Some I still don't exactly know what they are. But like, what have we done since, or what have we learned since about women's places in skilled trades? And so that's kind of like, what does the research show now? Well, there's still, it seems, sexual and gender harassment. There's still difficulties for women in being taken seriously, in feeling like they're being scrutinized. I think there's been some major improvements. We are recruiting young women into trades, some more than others. I think that like welding is having some success. I don't know if if we're being as successful in fields like, for instance, machining to create women machinists. So we've still got a ways to go, but it's sort of interesting now. I'm not done writing the article, but to kind of think about, all right, yeah, of course we've come a ways since 1985, since the publication of that amazing book. But yeah, we've still got a host of challenges if we want to retain women. The one thing that trades have going for them to some extent is they were male-dominated jobs, and as such, they were and still are. As such, they are more highly paid. So these trades tend to grab women who are willing to take a step because they want, if nothing else, a better paycheck.
Right.
I have a couple of thoughts. One, I think you should retire over there, come to Florida, and let's start a training school, right? Where we can have the right blend of classical education and skills so that kids, regardless of their economic levels, can be employable.
Can I just stop you right there and say, like, yeah, that sounds lovely. I love that idea because I think there's something to be said. Like, I think some programs want to get people working hands-on, like with the procedural knowledge of doing the trade to the extent they can in a 1-year program or even 2-year program. But I think sometimes what they might be missing is that conceptual knowledge too. So I love that. Like, why does what's the difference between an inverter and a transformer? Like, to understand the more conceptual knowledge, I think that I would have benefited from a little bit more of that in my program to understand like the relationship between volts and amps, for example. Yeah. So, okay, so far I'm on board.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, think about it. Physics and welding and thermodynamics, physics, thermodynamics, welding, material science, all of that would make a better welder, right?
Well, I see it every day in my boss, Jim. He didn't go to college, but obviously he has read a ton because he understands torque and tension, and he can talk about these physics concepts in a way as I have not taken those courses, so like I don't quite understand. And I've seen him do like incredible mathematics, like geometry, to figure out angles in like in for example, one time we were installing this thing that was supposed to, I built it. It was a dumpster stopper. It was this thing that was going to go on the end of the rails in the Hy-Vee grocery store to stop the dumpsters when they like go on the rails.
Chipping the paint off the walls.
Yeah, exactly. To keep them like from going through the wall. And but we to watch him like figure out like the geometry of how to like install it. Yeah, I mean, I think that there is so much like to Jim, my boss, it comes naturally, but maybe to me and others, it doesn't. So I think having a bit of that, like really well connected to the procedural knowledge would be beneficial.
So
Yeah.
instead of learning the theory and then getting some application later, it would be getting the application and then wrapping the theory around
Oh,
it
the classes then around.
to
So how
complement.
did this happen?
I
How
think
Yeah.
I think that would
Yeah.
be a new modality, like
Yeah.
a new
it's
way.
reverse.
I'm thinking
Yeah.
that's a business opportunity. I wish I hadn't said that now on our podcast.
Someone's gonna pick it up. Well,
Yeah.
Joe, as we kind of come to the end here, I'm thinking, right, there are probably people listening who are like, well, all right, I could be interested in something like that, or maybe I'm interested in trades, but I'm not really sure I'm a good fit. And I think what I sense in you, and like, and obviously I've known you for a little bit, but just even hearing you talk, you get super excited about the learning aspect of it, right? And it then seems to create more questions for you that you want to
Yeah.
investigate more. So you're super inquisitive in that respect about, then it's like another article, and then it's like another book, and like, here's the need for that. So for
Yeah.
our listeners, what advice might you have for somebody who's kind of like thinking, well, I was thinking I had to go to school for 4 years, but maybe a trade thing. What are some qualities or characteristics that you think would be well suited? And then I want you to have some time to plug your new book and kind of talk
Oh,
about what that is
okay.
and all that.
Well, I think if you're a person who likes to do things with your hands and appreciates what I call, and I'm not the only one who calls it this, but embodied knowledge, to understand like the connection between the mind and the hands. And
Kinesthetic learners, like a kinesthetic learner.
yeah, but the kind of knowledge that manifests when you're doing actions, right? Like so like welding is one. So I mean if you have any sort of interest in that, there's a few ways that you can check it out. Like first of all, some cities have what are called maker spaces.
Mhm.
Like a town like Duluth, Minnesota, near to me here, we have a maker space, and the Duluth is about maybe 100,000 people. It's not that big of a city. So if you're in like a metropolitan area, there's a very good chance that there's a place called a maker space near to you where you can go try different trades like on the cheap. So way before I took the course in welding and started taking a class at a community college, I just went to the maker space over there and paid like 80 bucks and just played around with MIG welding. And I was like, this is really fun. I like it. And
Right.
that kind of got my foot in the door to take a community college class. And you could take a night class at a community college or, you know, depending on your schedule. And a community college, they're not as expensive. So you're not making a gigantic investment. Then if you like it, you apply it towards a diploma or an associate's degree and you move on from there. So like you can try things and they're not super expensive. And I understand like $500, $600 is a lot of money for some people. I get it. But it's not like $7,000.
Right. It's not like you have to like invest in a program in order to dabble.
Yeah, you can try it out. But one thing, yeah, I think like trying a maker space, that's like my big find because I think it's pretty accessible to most people to try that. Another thing you can do is sort of look up some of if you can find some small shops in your area and just call them up and see if you can come visit. I think most shops would be pretty open to that as long as you know you wear all the PPE and kind of keep your fingers out of the machines to sort of see what it's all about and what an environment like that is like. Yeah, I mean, because for example, my boss, he really welcomes young people coming in to look. There are certain laws about what people who are like under 18 can do and what they can't do, but he wants people to learn trades, and I think he's not alone in that. I think there are other shop owners who want to
Other
like
gyms, right? We talked
other
about that.
gyms
You got to
out
make Jim
there.
like an Obi-Wan, like where he can just come as a like.
I think you should turn Jim's place into a summer camp opportunity for teens. That would be,
Oh,
you could run the
well.
summer camp and, and let kids come in and get their hands on something.
Yeah, I mean, I think that right. I mean, I like the idea in general of like young people getting opportunities to try different trades to see like, is this something that maybe is for me? And I think, yeah, that's one way to
Well,
do
and
it.
oftentimes they don't even know these jobs exist, right?
Exactly.
That's what we found in I learned by working with Kevin in this aerospace kind of industry
Hmm.
lens for education is that an industry has a job for everyone, but you might not know what that is. Like most people think an engineer, they don't really know what that means, and there's so many different
Right.
varieties.
And unfortunately,
Exactly.
with really like production manufacturing
Yeah.
companies, their liability for under 18-year-olds almost precludes things like internships for like if you got a
Yeah.
hotshot 15, 16-year-old that knows they want to do X, it's hard to get them into that place because of the age limitation. There's
Yeah.
got to be a middle ground, like
Yeah.
a safe space for young people to really get their hands dirty, as you'd say.
Well,
Yeah.
take some time to plug your latest book and tell people how they can get it and what they can expect within that, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, yeah, and I can give you the link for it too. It's called Learning Skilled Trades in the Workplace, and it's sort of the tale of my learning at workplace learning at House re Repair and Metal Fabrication. It's kind of a tour of how you gain competence in skilled trades, and it focuses on like learning breadth, like I was saying before, as well as depth of knowledge. So I talk about like different knowledges, like in the plural, across the shop. And it was just published by Springer. It's sort of a more personal book for me. Before I've done a lot of academic books, especially looking at language really carefully. And this one isn't a sort of analysis of the words people use. Instead, it's more personal. It's more anecdotes about making mistakes, having some successes, the interacting with clients, being nervous, getting frustrated, all of those things that go on when you're trying to develop different embodied knowledge, different sorts of competences. And it talks a little bit about like one chapter in particular about my experience as a woman in a shop. I don't focus on it too much because I think like people in general, we're all learners. But if you're a woman, and I imagine it's the same if you're a member of some other marginalized group, that, your experience will vary a bit. Yeah.
Right. Well, business owners, on one hand, humans are stupid, but on the other hand, they're pragmatic, right?
Mhm.
So why would you exclude 50% of a population if you need workers, right?
Yeah.
If you need people, it's not very smart to exclude half of the potential workforce.
Yeah, and send the
Yeah.
link. I'll put it in the show notes.
Okay, I will. Yeah. And I mean, to your point, Kevin, I think that's true. I think more companies are thinking in those terms and looking for formal structures to
Mm,
invite to recruit people from marginalized groups. I think the question, like the research shows, is what sorts of informal workplace cultures work to make people from marginalized or underrepresented groups feel less than welcome.
right.
So that's like where research is trying to figure out, okay, why do they stay or why do they not stay, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I think there's way more work to be done there, but I think we have come a fair bit from Alone in a Crowd in
I,
1985.
I really enjoyed this conversation. I know
Thanks, me too.
I could probably ask another hour's worth of questions.
I can talk for another I love talking about these things. Yeah, it's a passion for sure.
Well, we'll make sure that we get you scheduled for another because
Ah,
as always, I actually learned so much just from having these conversations with you. And what I like when we have had those conversations in the past is it sparks for me like the stuff that we're doing. I can
yeah.
see the connections between them and also recognize that this need seems to be ubiquitous. I mean, it's just across the board when it comes to any of these kind of STEM careers, particularly. But I'm sure it goes beyond that into how are we training as and my focus, like I've shared with you, and I think I want to write a little bit more on is how generational impacts affect that too. Like
Oh,
students
yeah.
in whatever cohort they're in tend to
Yeah.
maybe learn differently, see things differently, communicate things differently. And how do we work with
Hmm.
this newer generation to get them inspired to go into these
That's
careers?
fascinating. I
Mhm.
love that.
All
Yeah.
right. Well,
I'll
thank
help.
you so much. And we look forward to
Thank
chatting again
you. I
soon.
so appreciate this. It's been a pleasure. And I'm sorry I goofed up the day.
No worries. Thank you for being here. We enjoyed it very much.
Bye.